This is not the Creality K1 Max, this is the K1. But in this video, I want to review the K1 Max, but also review the K1 again. It will all make sense, or not. Let's go! So I've been using the Creality K1 for over 100 hours now, which isn't much by most people's standards, I guess, but for me it means a lot of prints, as I usually do small repeatable test prints, like the ones recently in the last video on VOCs. So 100 hours does probably represent in the order of 200 plus print cycles, perhaps even more than that, as a test cube is about 12 minutes on this machine. So it's enough to tell you what I think of the machine and report any issues that arise, and I'm happy to say, not many. Surprisingly, the printer has not really failed to print much at all. I don't think it's failed to level the bed, for example, even once. As you can see, the bed is lacking any scars from the usual kind of bed nozzle crash things. It's still in good visual condition. As far as wear and tear on the broader machine, there's some marking to the belt at the back, and of course the acrylic surfaces on the edge of the printer, they're very prone to being scratched, and they are absolutely fingerprint and dust magnets, but not a lot else that I can see. Continuity issues may mean that you're seeing the machine in the future with the changed hot end on it. We'll just skip over that and switch to the Max. The Max is the larger version of the K1, but it is also the significantly nicer version. It has the AI camera, that's new, and it has some LiDAR thing on the side of the hot end. The LiDAR is supposed to help with the first layer, although, just like on the X1 Carbon, it's really debatable as to whether this actually does this in isolation. Both of these machines have non-LiDAR counterparts, and those machines managed to do a perfectly good job of first layers, so who knows? The glass lid is definitely a welcome addition on the Max. It makes it look overall more premium, even though the price difference isn't really that huge between the two machines. One thing I would like to see on the glass lid, and that's something we can probably do ourselves, is create something that can hold it slightly open for when you're printing PLA, because you want the lid to allow some air out, and you don't necessarily want to have to take it off. So if you could just open it slightly, just tilt it, that would be really useful, but of course it has to not fall off. All my attempts to prop it open have resulted in it shaking itself closed, and that's quite scary because it's glass. They both come with the same A plate. This plate requires glue stick, although maybe not. I've been using it with glue stick because I was told to, and of course because it's the same as the one on the Bamboo, which I was told to use glue stick there. A lot of comments, people seem to be really hating the fact you have to use glue stick. It's not that big a deal, really. But a couple of test prints on the K1 without glue stick, they seem to be printing fine, so who knows anymore? Who knows anything anymore? If you're wondering, there is apparently a B plate. I'm not sure how available it is yet, but I've been told there's a B plate, and the B plate is textured PEI. So this camera, you can see it in the app, which would frankly be a lot better if the app didn't keep pinging you with every random promotion that Creality wants you to know about. But more realistically, you want to use the printer through the slicer and the web browser. If you turn on the AI functions, it can do some AI stuff with the camera. One thing it seems to do that Bamboo didn't until recently, at least this is what it appeared to do. If you pay attention to the 3D printing drama, you know that Bamboo had a thing recently. The K1 seems to check the build plate before actually starting the print to see if there's already something on there, which, yeah, it doesn't seem that hard in retrospect, does it, in hindsight? I don't know why Bamboo never thought to do that, but they are implementing it now, apparently. Of course, the downside to this is that, to a camera, anything looks like an object, including the white remains of the previous print in the glue stick. So this system isn't foolproof, but it does just ask you, do you want to start the print anyway? The K1 Max in most other respects is the same as the K1, at least externally, apart from the size. So let's go back to the K1. Creality have sent me a small collection of parts for the K1. These didn't all arrive at once, which would be weird. You get spares with the original machine, or at least reviewers did. I don't know whether they're going to send those out to end users. And they also sent me 2 revisions, although it's not necessarily easy to see what these revisions do. The last revision is pretty obvious though, as it's a bimetal heat break, and this is the one that, along with this extruder, which is made of some other metal to the original one, these are the ones that I believe are in the K1 Max. So it makes sense to fit these to the K1, and we'll also put the camera they've sent me, and we'll see what these do. That hot end change was a huge pain to do, I'll be honest. It's not that different to changing a heat break on any other machine, it's just that normally, as a consumer, you're not expected to do that. The extruder was pretty easy though, that just slots in. The camera was also very easy to put on. Once the camera is on, you have to reboot the machine, and then you'll see the camera in the interface, and also the menus on the machine start working, so there's no config needed at all to make that work. Surprisingly, and this goes for the K1 Max as well, the camera frame rate is actually really high, even over Wi-Fi. This is probably down to the X2000E chip that they chose to use, which has some fancy video encoding on chip. I think it's probably encoded to H.264. I literally don't know. Not that the Raspberry Pi can't do that, but the frame rate isn't always a given on these machines. I've seen many printers that come with a really low frame rate. Time lapses can, of course, be taken on this machine with the camera, which means they can be taken on the K1 Max as well. Both machines literally work the same once you've added the camera, and seeing the time lapse is a lot easier if you do capitulate and use the Creality app. So I should probably mention the K1 has survived my changes and it is printing just fine, and the new hot end is supposedly more reliable and should provide better PLA printing with the lid on, for example, because of the bimetallic nature of the heat break. I might try and explain that in a diagram on screen, or I might not. It's to do with the heatsink temperature, basically, and the thermal interface in the bimetal heat break, meaning that the heatsink doesn't get as hot, meaning you don't get heat creep. It's definitely beyond the scope of this review. So as you know, if you watch the K1 review, which you should if you haven't, because this is kind of an addendum, I'm not repeating a lot of things in that video on the K1 to save time, but the K1 and the Max run Clipper, and they both have the same board inside, which is using a MIPS-based chip, and it's using an STM32-based chip. It's also still closed source, although Creality is going to be releasing the code soon. Allegedly, that should be very soon. They said September, I think. This will be very interesting to see, so keep an eye out for that. As things stand, the same applies as I said last video. You still can't legitimately get root access on the K1 or Max, or access Moonraker API directly, which is the second one is more annoying, to be honest, for me, because it means that printing from a third-party slicer, it becomes a more manual process. You can't use the plugins. I did cover that in the last video. This may change though within a few weeks after they release the source. I have no idea how that's going to pan out because I literally don't know what they mean by releasing the source. So we'll see. We'll see. The Max has an extra PCB on it next to the main board. This is quite notable because it's huge. This thing is driving a mains voltage bed. This is great news for non-US users who have 240 volts typically, because it will heat the bed up really quickly, but US users on 120 volts, they will not notice nearly as much difference from the original K1 heat-up time. I'm a huge fan of mains-powered beds, but obviously they have their caveats, like needing to be adequately protected. Nobody wants to be electrocuted. It is, of course, a lot easier to do that on this style of printer compared to a bed slinger, because these beds just move slowly up and down. But of course, it's also essential to earth the bed as well. So, in terms of final thoughts, I think this machine is actually fine. It looks good. It's still insanely reflective and hard to photograph, but those are characteristics that people seem to like at the moment. It turns out that the K1 series, eventually, after enough dust has settled, and plenty has on my machine for sure, after several hot end and extruder iterations, it may turn out to be as much of a workhorse as we would like it to be. Of course, printers break down, and these ones probably will not be as reliable as bed slingers due to the increased number of parts, and it's hard to really hear through the noise online, especially on popular machines that sell well. This is something that plagues Bamboo Lab as much as it does plague Creality. You have a bias, you only hear the bad news because those are the people talking. Although some of those comments are definitely well-founded, most machines do not require 3 extruder revisions after release. But on balance, I think the K1 series is actually looking quite solid going into the future, with parts like these that can be replaced, and at least Creality are addressing these teething issues if you actually had them. It does, of course, all still hinge on the things I said in the K1 review about the source code and the clipper accessibility, which still remain outstanding. As a final personal musing, it will be interesting to see where Creality take this next. Will there be another K-series machine? And if so, what will it look like? What will they decide to change? Who knows? And with that, thank you for watching.